Hi, Dick Rauscher here. Today we're going to be talking about nugget number 243, Dismantling Fear and the Dangerous Myths Embedded Inside Global Capitalism. Here's some of the key concepts that I talk about in this article. One is the concept that if you watch television, if you read the newspapers, everything that you read today and are bombarded with is about fear. Fear of terrorism, terror attacks, fear of the food we're eating. The messages of fear are overwhelming in our culture today. And the concept that I want to talk about here for a second, the key concept is that when we're driven by fear, we can be manipulated. In other words, we end up feeling powerless. These fears are so big that there's nothing we can do. So we give up our power and then we can be manipulated by the system. So one of the first concepts, key concepts, is just recognize every time you see a story about fear, ask how are you being manipulated? Why does the system want me powerless and giving up my own autonomy? Okay, that's key concept number one. Key concept number two is the solution. Focus on what we can do. We can always take control of our lives. We do not have to be powerless. We're not. And we don't have to be manipulated as long as we're awake and aware of it. So the second key concept is take control of your life where you can. For example, one real important area is just simplify things. Make life simpler. The more simple that we operate, the more control we have. For example, instead of relying on food from the store, plant a garden. Slow down your life. I mean, there's a lot of examples of what people are sharing with us these days on how to become a little bit more centered. Third major concept in the article is the danger of consumption for two reasons, and we'll get to the second one in a second. But the first one is that along with the fear and the manipulation that's possible when we're driven by fear is the idea that consumption and what all the advertising is saying is the implied message that somehow if you consume their product, you will be happier and you will be healthier. So whenever you hear advertisements to consume something, this is the hidden message that they're really trying to get you to buy into. Again, manipulation. Stay awake, recognize that consumption is not happiness. In fact, as I point out in the article, consumption almost always leads, the more things you buy, the more things you have to fix, the more things you have to take care of, the more you go into debt. It's a never-ending downward cycle. And of course, then their solution is, well, just buy this next new thing and then you'll really be happy. So just recognize that happiness does not come from consumption. Happiness is a whole different subject. The next major point in the article is an important one, and that is we don't have to be powerless. We can demand change. And I use the word demand, it's kind of an aggressive word, but what I'm pointing out is that when the commons, in other words, when you and I begin to push for change, our politicians are forced to listen. When enough of us are demanding change, then the politicians have it in their own self-interest because they want to get reelected. They have to begin to respond to what we're asking for and demanding. So when we demand change, we have the power to shift the entire system. So obviously one of the things that we need to do is to speak up, do what we can to join our voices together to ask and demand the change, basically, that we want to see in the world. Okay, and this is the antidote for the manipulation and the sense of powerless. Okay, the last concept in the big idea in the paper is endless growth. We are being manipulated through consumption with the concept that growth can be endless, that it can be infinite, and that Wendell Berry, for example, in his book The Unsettling of America that he wrote back, I don't know, in the 70s, I think, or early 80s, great philosopher. At any rate, one of the things he pointed out is that endless growth is one of the most dangerous myths that humanity has ever created. And in the article, and you can read more detail, but basically I talk about the article about the king and the peasant. And the peasant did something really great, and the king wanted to reward him. So the king said, "I will grant you any wish you want." And the peasant said, "Well, do you have a chessboard?" And the king got out a chessboard, and the peasant said, "What I would like as a reward is a grain of sand, a grain of wheat, on the first square of the chessboard. And then on the second square, I'd like 2 grains of sand. And then on the third, I'd like 4. And then on the next one, 8. And then the next one, 16. And of course, the king chuckled to himself and he says, "Wow, I think the peasant here is kind of missing the bet. He could be, really asking for something big, but so I'll grant it." Well, the long story, the end of the story is a very simple one, that by the time the king got to the 64th square, he had a mountain of grain larger than Mount Everest. It weighed something like, 30 or 40 trillion metric tons. And of course, the king was bankrupt and the kingdom fell apart. What the king didn't recognize, and what we don't seem to be recognizing in our economic systems around the world at a global level, is that when you have unlimited growth, what you really are talking about is exponential growth. Okay? And what we're doing is we're growing exponentially, and exponential eventually heads for infinity. So what the king didn't realize was exponential growth. So what we have to do is recognize that economic growth, can't be exponential. It's going to destroy everything. Economic growth is not reasonable. It's not feasible. It's not realistic. So we're headed for infinite growth in population, infinite growth in food production, infinite wealth, on and on and on. But the basic concept is, don't buy into the myth of endless growth or unlimited economic growth. It's a myth, and it's a dangerous one. The other, demand change, take back your power. Politicians will listen if your voice is out there being heard. Consumption will not lead to happiness. In fact, quite the opposite. Focus on solutions. What can you do? Simplify your life is one big one. And just become aware that fear is the way that we are manipulated into powerlessness. If you'd like to read the article, click on the buttons below. One will take you to the article, and the other one will take you to a sign-up page so that you can sign up for the Stony Hill Nuggets and get them in your mailbox free every week or every other week when we publish.